One of the people I took on staff started doing these parables retold, and Angel Studios saw what he'd done and said, if you can do what we've seen on a budget as small as you had, we want to see what you can do on a bigger budget.
Dr. Hugh Osgood is a distinguished UK church leader and international Bible teacher with over 50 years of ministry experience. He served as Free Church's moderator and president of Churches Together in England and founded Churches in Communities International. Through his charity, Charis Communications, he's passionate about increasing biblical literacy worldwide, offering free teaching resources, and developing leaders through his Bible Academy program.
His sermons have been widely broadcast on radio and TV, and he's authored several books on Christian leadership and biblical understanding.
There was a Christian union at the university, and I had this very arrogant attitude, which was, Lord, if I do become a committed Christian, please don't make me like them. I actually had an encounter with God, and I just knew that it was real, because that verse in 1 John, by this we know we pass from death to life, and that we love the brothers. And my attitude towards all these students suddenly completely changed, and instead of avoiding the Christian union, I actually was probably chief recruiter at that particular point.
During that time of church planting, how were you doing that?
We were finding it hard. When you set up a church, initially in our home, all sorts of people come. And initially they think, oh, we joined this church because this is a young guy, we can manipulate it in any way we want to. And then they discover you're not quite as malleable as they hoped. And you end up with people that have got really deep problems.
Hugh, thank you so much for joining me on Faith Off the Record. It's a privilege, it's an honor. You're someone who I inspire and also look up to, and just overall thankful for our relationship, our friendship, and just your mentorship as well to me personally and in my Christian journey. But overall, thank you again just for coming down to the studio, and I welcome you on this episode.
Thanks, Joe. That's quite a welcome, actually. A little bit flattering, but we can cope with that, I think.
Let's talk, and I'd love for you to just really talk about, sort of, for those who don't know you, can you describe Hugh Osgood, or who you are and your sort of what you do?
That's a huge question, isn't it, really? Just sum up your life in a couple of moments. Well, I've been in ministry a long time, really, and I've done quite a lot of different things. I done student ministry. I used to do a lot of student missions, and then planted a church, and saw a church grow. Saw a lot of work across interchurch stuff as well. So I've been president of Churches Together in England. I've been the moderator of the Free Churches group. I've been the convener of the Charismatic Leaders Conference. I've done quite a lot of different things, really. So that's a little bit of an insight into who I am. You can dig a bit deeper.
So obviously I know, and obviously a lot of our audience may not know, but you've worked with Billy Graham, you've worked with a number of people who have really paved the way and done some phenomenal work in the United Kingdom. And let's talk about Billy, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all.
What was it like meeting Billy? How did that happen? And any just insights on terms of working with him?
Yeah, I was pastoring a church in Bromley, and the Louis Palau mission took place in 83, 84. And at that particular time, there was a strategy that we'd have regional missions around London and then a big central one at QPR. And I got very involved in the local mission initially, which was at Blackheath. And that was quite remarkable, because what happened was we put on a children's event on the Saturday morning, and the tent that we were using almost took off. I mean, we had the most incredible storm, really. And in fact, we had to get all the kids out, and then the tent was ripped to shreds in the wind and the rain and everything. And it did mean that when we got to the end of that sector of the mission, a lot of people were saying, we still need to do something in South East London. So we continued with the committee. They put me in as chairman, and we looked at how we could impact South East London. So I started working across the churches. This would have been in 85, I suppose. And somehow someone got wind of the fact that I already probably knew quite well 1/4 of London. And they came up with this idea that I'd only got to learn the other 3/4 and I'd be really useful in terms of London. So by the time that the Billy Graham organisation wanted to come in and do a mission in 89, I suppose I was the obvious person to pick upon to say, look, you know London, help us put the mission together.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved with that.
And what was your first time meeting him? Anything to stand out? What was his character like?
He's very affable. I remember the first time I actually met him. They'd asked me to sort of do this role in looking after all the churches and follow up in London. And at the time, I was doing student missions, so I was reluctant to actually cut down the student work. So rather cheekily, I'd actually said, look, I tell you what, give me the student brief and we'll find someone else to do London. And they then put on this reception where Billy Graham had come over from the States, and he was shaking hands with all the people, and he got to me and he was shaking my hand, and someone whispered in his ear, oh, this is Hugh Osgood, he's going to look after the students. And he looked at me and he just said, thank you, and was holding onto my hand. And I had this overwhelming sense of guilt that I should have said yes to what they'd asked me to do rather than try and wriggle out of it. So whilst I was standing there, I thought, yeah, I've got to really give myself to this.
Yeah.
So it was quite an impressive meeting, He's just held my attention with his eyes and was holding my hand, and without me actually saying anything, I completely turned my life around and thought, all right, I'll leave the student ministry of DB and give myself to working on the larger scale right across the churches.
Wow, so good. Let's take it back, and I want to understand sort of how did you come to the faith, and how did you sort of get that encounter? And
a Christian family, which was great. They were very involved in the Salvation Army. My grandparents have been Salvation Army officers right back in sort of the early days, really. So I'd got that kind of background with that sense. But my parents moved around a little bit and didn't feel comfortable at one point in continuing the Salvation Army. Well, what they did, first of all, was to go and help a very small centre where there was no children's or youth work. So that left my brother and my sisters and myself feeling a little bit, well, where do we go now? Mm-hmm. So we sort of went to the nearest church that we could find, which was just a Church of England church at the top of the road where we lived, really. So, I got involved in that. They stuck me in the church choir, put a frilly thing around my neck, and as they do in the Church of England. And that was good. And then I got involved in helping with the youth work there. But when I started at university, I just was really not walking with the Lord at all.
Right.
And
why was that?
Why was that? I think I was going through the teenage, I know it all kind of phase, really.
Right.
I tell you what I was like. I didn't pass the 11 plus, so I just went to an ordinary kind of school, but it was ideal for me because, I suddenly found that I was doing very well. Instead of being at the bottom of the class, suddenly I was at the top of the class, which was extraordinary. And I was the only person, everyone says, I was the only person in my family. I was the only person from my school ever to got anywhere near to go to university, actually, at that point. So I headed off I thought I needed to prepare myself because I was only 17 when I went to university. And I thought, gosh, everyone else there is going to be so clever. So I thought, what can I do to look clever? So the summer before I went to university, I went and worked my way through the theological section in the local library, thinking that this would make me look really hyper-intelligent.
Right.
And when I got to university, I just realized it made me look super irrelevant. I was doing medicine and dentistry, and I got all this sort of theological stuff in my head.
Yeah.
And there was a Christian union at the university that kept inviting me to their meetings. And I'd go to their meetings and I'd sit there and I'd mark their prayers out of 10, thinking, well, that wasn't a very good one. I'll give him 3 for that one. It was very critical, the whole thing. And I also had this very arrogant attitude, which was, Lord, if I do become a committed Christian, please don't make me like them. And it was such an awful thing to say, really. But I actually had an encounter with God during my first summer back from university, and it was just incredible. I just knew when I had this encounter with the Lord that it was real, because there's that verse in 1 John where it says, by this we know we pass from death to life, and that we love the brothers. And my attitude towards all these students that I'd fallen out with suddenly completely changed, and I just couldn't wait to get back to university. And so my second year at university was very different from my first.
Right.
Instead of avoiding the Christian Union, I actually was probably chief recruiter at that particular point.
Wow.
Yeah, so quite a big turnaround, really.
Did you ever think about your career in a sense of from a non-Christian perspective, which is if you wasn't, who you are today and sort of the career path you went
definitely. I'd got a very clear career path marked out. I wanted to do maxillofacial surgery. So I was looking at doing medicine and dentistry, sort of cancer of the face, jaws, RTAs, road traffic accidents, those kind of things. And that was sort of my ambition. But then at the end of my first year at university, when I met the Lord, I just knew I was going to end up in ministry. So I was helping with this Church of England youth group. So I contacted the Church of England and said, I want to do theology and go into the ministry. And with great wisdom, they said, you're too young and you're too inexperienced, which was absolutely true. And they said, why didn't you finish the dentistry and contact us again? So dropped the medicine, did the dentistry, got to the end of that, finishing the dentistry, and thought, wow, off I go, theological college, into ministry. And I thought, well, I better pray about it before I do that. And I had this real word from the Lord, which was render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And I was trying really hard to remind the Lord that there's a second half to that verse. But he seemed to be focusing on the first half. That I'd got to put back something. Because in those days, you got a grant. You didn't have to, go and take out a loan.
Yeah.
They blessed you with finance. So I just had 6 years of training at government expense. And I was going to walk away. And I just felt the Lord was saying, you've got to put something back into the system. And then amazingly, I still don't know how God orchestrated this. I actually, just with my dental qualification, landed 2 incredible jobs, well, 3 really, in various London teaching hospitals. So I ended up working in maxillofacial units for a year before I actually sort of went down a different route and then started looking at, we were then planning to go overseas, to work overseas. I'd met my wife by then, as she was the night sister on the intensive care unit at one of the hospitals where I was working. So yeah,
that's amazing. So even though you knew in your heart ministry was there, render to Caesar was the theme and the spirit leading you to, which then you deployed back into.
Well, I then worked out that actually maybe I could render to Caesar and God at the same time if I went as a missionary to Africa. And so we'd got that all lined up. We knew where we were going and everything else. And then extraordinarily, the project we were going to lost its funding. So right at the last minute, just we were going to get married and go out there, it had all sort of come to an end. And then someone came up and gave me this prophetic word, which back in the 70s sounded really crazy, which is, I don't think God wants you to go to Africa. He's going to send Africa to you. Well, honestly, in the 70s, there wasn't much sign of Africa coming here, really.
Right.
But funnily enough, the first thing that happened when we started church planting, one of the first things, we had a girl in the church. She was a nurse, and she went to work on a Monday, and this student nurse on the ward, who was from Africa, she collapsed. Turned out she'd given birth on the Friday, put the baby into foster care on the Saturday, come back to work on the Monday without having even telling anyone she was expecting. So we took the baby, and then we invited her to live with us. And when we asked her where she grew up, she said, country that we were going to. We thought, well, that's interesting. And then the region that we were going to. And then she actually said, well, I grew up on a mission station. And it was exactly the place that we were meant to be going to.
Right.
So we ended up with someone coming to our home and living with us in Bromley, having expected to actually be out there in Africa working where she'd come from. So it's just extraordinary.
Wow. Can I talk about sort of the transition from the 1 year you did giving back and then going into, the Bible theological training? What was that transition like? Did you contact them back and said, I'm done, can I come in? Or what was that sort of, how did you go from dentistry then and medical into?
A few things had happened along the way at that particular point. I think when we were challenged about church planting, which we were, we'd thought when we went to Africa, part of rendering to God at the same time as rendering to Caesar, we could do some medical work, and at the same time we could do some church planting. And then some wise missionary did say, don't try and do anything overseas that you haven't done at home first. So at that particular point, when I'd finished that year working in hospital, I think my top priority was, where can I learn how to do church planting? So we were looking around the UK. There wasn't much going on initially, We thought we'd probably work in a Brethren assembly down in Cornwall. That didn't quite work out. And then we ended up, my wife, Marion, her choice was, well, I'll do midwifery. And so she worked out where she wanted to do that. And then God began to open doors. I went and worked in a dental practice. We got involved with a church plant in South London. And so I didn't actually go and do my theological training at that point. I did it all back to front. So
wow.
I did all the hands-on stuff first. And then eventually I did a master's in divinity with a college in Pakistan, which was a bit of a surprise to people when they see that on my CV. And then I did my doctorate at School of Oriental African Studies in London. So,
Wow.
So I did it back to front.
You did back to front. And during that time, obviously, your church planting and going for that, what other how were you doing that? Was it a formula? Was someone telling you? Did you have a mentor? Or was it just all God-given?
That sounds superb. It was all God-given. How I'd love to say that. No, actually, there were people around who were helping. There was. I was picking up. There were networks of church planters and so on. I must admit that there were people who could have been regarded as apostolic leaders, who could have been mentoring us. But I think there was a lot of wisdom in the fact that they really encouraged us to relate to each other. So a lot of it was about learning from other people who were doing the same thing at the same time.
Right.
And we were finding it hard. I mean, when you set up a church, initially in our home, all sorts of people have come. And, initially they think, oh, we joined this church because this is a young guy. We can manipulate it in any way we want to. Yeah. And then they discover you're not quite as malleable as they hoped. And you end up with people that have got really deep problems. And you're young and you're trying to deal with these things. I think there are sometimes advantages of being young and learning rather than being terribly experienced and knowing everything. Right. Certainly we found that the church grew because there was an energy and a dynamism which it might have lacked if I'd sort of reached the sort of inertia of wisdom phase, where the wisest thing is to do nothing. So we were very much on to doing everything that we possibly could. And there was a vibrancy about it. And there's all sorts of things happening at that time that actually enabled us to see a lot of young people come into the church. And it was just great. It was a good time.
In terms of current day that we live in, and based off what you've gone through in history and church planting, and is there a big difference in terms of the way things are happening now and, what you saw? And what's that like in your view?
That's a good question, actually. I would say that there is a difference. I think people now are more cautious and we were more crazy. And I think sometimes we could do with a little bit more craziness. And back then we probably could have done with a bit more caution. I think there's something that I love when I see people with energy and vision. I quite like the idea of entrepreneurial church planters. Whereas a lot of what happens these days is it's very organized. You have a group of people moving from one church into another church and they do a core plant and they talk about different types of church planting, like the strawberry model where you've got the runner going underground and emerge. There's all these different strategies. We just went for it, basically. Right. And there's something about that which I still want to encourage, with what's happening at the moment with younger people coming up with interest. I started church planting when I was in my mid-20s. And I get really frustrated that there are churches which won't let anyone near a platform until they're in their mid-30s. And you think, well, what's all that about? It's a kind of hold people back. And I think sometimes it's because it's quite easy to become protective of your own position. Whereas if you've got a mindset that wants to give everything away, then... which I'm told is my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. I just want to give everything away.
Well, I certainly leverage that.
Yeah.
But, I think you're right. And I think we've seen a lot of opportunities, and especially this young generation, and really going for it. And so I just wanted to ask, what's your advice for, this current demographic of folk that are coming into the Lord and Christianity and, really feeling that maybe they don't have these opportunities, really go for it? Is your advice to kind of, for this generation, to just go for it, be bold and step out?
Yeah, pretty much. But also don't write off the people that have got something to offer you. But there's a lot of wisdom that we could tap into. I think we kind of regarded ourselves as a fatherless generation. We wrote off the people that had, of course, we were sort of baby boomers, and the generation before us had been through the war, and that meant absolutely nothing to us, really. So there was a kind of disconnect, and I've felt that a little bit. I think a lot of millennials have felt a disconnect, and I think now we've got a disconnect sometimes between Gen Z and millennials. So I think there's a tendency to feel a little bit bereft when you needn't. But it doesn't mean that you need to look for people that are going to curtail your activities. I'd rather find people that will encourage you in what you're doing. There's a tendency to it's a bit like if we wanted to teach someone to drive and we spent all the time teaching them the theory and never let them get behind the wheel. Right. I think we've got a little bit of a reluctance to let people get behind the wheel. Yeah. And it's with a car, you can't really steer it until it's moving. And it's a bit like that with people too. You can't really steer them until they're moving. So we need to encourage people to get up and get going, really.
Yeah. Is that what you're seeing in today's current Christian climate, where there's a lot of stiffness, there's a lot of people who have callings and destiny and not moving? And
yeah, but I'm beginning to think it's a little bit of a generational thing, because I'm quite optimistic about what's happening at the moment with the younger leaders that are coming up. I think they are breaking through in ways, and we've just got to make sure that we can encourage them and support them in that. Yeah. So I can find stiffness in some places, and normally if you've got that kind of stiffness around for too long, that network of churches or denomination will end up shrinking, because you're not actually encouraging folk to come forward. So I think we've got to keep encouraging people to get up and get going. Yeah.
Do you still aspire in the medical side of things? Do you still debate yourself between medical and God and divinity? Those sort of things?
Not really. I did miss the medical world a bit, but my wife was still continuing to work as a practice nurse, so there were little bits that had come in that would stir the memories, and I'd remember odd diagnoses and treatment plans and prognoses and all the rest of it. But it's never really raised major theological questions for me. I think I worked out quite a lot of those. I think when you're working in hospital, it's quite a big reality check, and you do have to work through some of those kind of issues. And it does make a difference. I think you're facing life. And I'm really grateful for those years. I think I spent 20 years whilst I was church planting, still working at least part-time in a dental practice, because it's very difficult, isn't it, to say to your congregation, you've got to go out there and make a difference in the world, and you actually don't yourself. So I was quite grateful for that opportunity.
What would you say to then, someone who believes they're called into ministry or into being a pastor, and studying something right now in a professional field? It could be medical, engineering, whatever it could be, and they're in that sort of decision-making process to kind of say, well, how do I do this? What steps do I take? What's your suggestions for that?
Well, I didn't tell you, the other time I really sought God for a scripture was when I got this information about, you're too young, you've got to finish the dentistry. And I sat down with a friend that summer and we said, let's pray this through. And at the end of the summer, he left medicine, went off and joined a missionary society. And I just felt the Lord was saying to me from, what it says in Corinthians, in whatever state you're called, therein remain. And so I do see a value in whatever background you're in, actually making the most of it and serving in it. I don't think it's necessary for everyone, as it were, to leave their nets. You can follow Jesus and still have a role in society. So I think there's a place for that. But if someone has got that strong sense of calling, start serving. Start serving. And you can serve and share the love of Jesus in your workplace, but you can also be learning in the church context as well. Find a church that will encourage you and give you opportunity, And, it's not impossible to run the two things side by side.
Yeah.
To have an active church life and have an active work life as well.
Yeah. And for those who's looking for kind of like, that impression, normally it's impressions, normally it's confirmation, normally it's like audible for someone to recognize I'm called for ministry. And from your perspective, how do you define that sort of validation for calling? Is it a case of, there's evidence of spiritual gifts? Is there evidence of, you've got a heart for evangelism? Because a lot of people sometimes can think about, oh, I'm called, but really it's not being clarified, or, they're still trying to find their calling. So I'm asking this question because there could be people who are listening who are really in that position and season of
I'm sure there will be, because basically there's a sense in which when the Lord calls you, he's calling you to ministry of some sort. He's calling you to serve him. The Lord has need of you. How he's going to use you and what he's going to do with you, well, we just have to see in some ways. I remember how the Lord just spoke to me on one occasion. He said, if you put your life into my hand, I'll use you to feed 5,000. I thought, well, that's great. And then I thought, well, actually, that bread got broken before it was given to anybody.
Wow.
And I think I accepted quite early on that pathways into ministry can be quite tough, and you get rejections and you get put down, but you press on, and you just know that in a sense it's out of your brokenness that you can give so much. Yeah. So I would encourage people, if you've got a sense of calling from the Lord, that's great. It doesn't surprise me in the least. I believe that Jesus not only wanted to make followers, he also wanted to make followers into leaders. So I can see God doing that in lots of people's lives. Yeah. And I'd love the church to feel less, these are the ministers and these are the ministered to. I think we've break down some of those divides.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to talk about sort of the challenges and some of the obstacles, and I'm sure you're not adverse to all of them, but you've certainly seen them as well and sort of overcome them. In terms of rejection, as you talked about, in terms of letdowns, right? How do you sort of bounce back from that? Is it a case of just pray and sort of move on? So what's the sort of ingredients that you think help someone who's a Christian, who's been let down, scarred? What's the best way that they can kind of pick themselves up, be encouraged, and keep moving forward?
Well, it's a mixture, isn't it? I know I do have a sort of bounce back personality most of the time, so I would want to bounce back. And I do believe that in a sense, when it talks about the Lord giving us resurrection life, that's a characteristic of the life that we have in him, that no matter how many times we get knocked down, we get picked up again. And Paul certainly showed that. I think it's the way we demonstrate resurrection life. I love the fact that someone said, Moses didn't turn aside to see a burning bush. He turned aside to see a burning bush that wasn't consumed. And it's when we're going through the difficulties sometimes, the fact that we're not consumed in the midst of the difficulties can be the testimony. But it doesn't mean to say that bouncing back is all a personality thing, hey, I'm back and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Sometimes
you've got to allow those tough times to work in your life a little bit. And, I've gone through times when I've really felt the Lord has just said to me, look, take your time on this. You could bounce back and be Mr. Superman and back there next week. But, there are things I want to teach you. And you just have to go with it sometimes and let the Lord work those kind of things in your life.
Yeah, so good. And when we talk about bounce back, we know in this day and age, things happen, life happens, and there could be times where people are being emotionally scarred, and the challenge then becomes, which is for someone who's so rooted in Christianity, the faith, it hinders them away from the faith, right? Because of those circumstances, and we know that the devil comes to kill, steal, and destroy. So, just talk to me through in terms of from your experience on how do we nurture the faith? How do we contain that faith and edify the faith to kind of know that God still loves us. Yeah. God still is with us.
I think the biggest challenge when you're going through a crisis is avoiding bitterness. I think, we can get hurt and people do things to us. And if bitterness comes in, then that's hard. It really is difficult to shift. And it talks in the Bible about a root of bitterness can defile many. So it's sad, really, because when someone gets bitter, it can change the whole environment and change the tone. So that's one of the reasons why I think Jesus was so strong on forgiving people. And you've got to actively do that, because otherwise you'll carry resentment, bitterness, and it'll turn you into someone that God didn't want you to be if you're not careful. It'll twist you, and that's not good. So I think it's really important to, when we're going through those times and we can sense that maybe we are developing that bitterness, we've really got to find ways of clearing that, and be gracious in our forgiving, and reach out to people who might have hurt us. That's hard, but you have to do that as well.
Yeah. As someone who's pioneered a number of churches and been around Christianity with faith and all the work you've done at the moment as well, Hugh, where do you think, in terms of where some of the current gaps are in Christianity today, and what can we do better to improve that?
Yeah, there are some gaps. Some things that once were quite important in the church, things like purity, holiness, tend to have gone a little bit onto the back burner. Church is very much about enthusiasm. There's not much teaching on brokenness and how God can use us in our humility. So if we're not careful, we will end up presenting to the world just another copy of what the world already knows. Whereas, we are meant to be presenting a different kingdom, a kingdom in which the first shall be last. That's a big turnaround, isn't it? Yeah. And people think we're going to turn the world upside down. And I'm not quite sure what they've got in mind, because when Jesus taught about turning things upside down, it was so that those who were at the bottom of the pile would be at the top, and those at the top would be prepared to take the lowest place. At the moment, it seems like a race for the top. Whereas, when Jesus talked, he said, if you're invited to a meal, take the lowest place. And I get a little bit amazed at how everyone wants to sit at the top table these days and think that that's the big testimony. Look how great I've grown in how much this time, and now you've got to call me the Reverend Dr. So-and-so, or you've got to call me this, and, you've got to go through 6 people before you can have a conversation with me. And I just think, oh, come on, where's that come from?
Yeah.
Because Jesus wasn't like that. And now we have conversations about pastoral distance, as if the greater the distance between you and the congregation, the more important you are. Well, I said to someone once, what do you think Jesus thought about pastoral distance? And they just said to me, well, he touched the lepers, didn't he? And you think, well, yes, he didn't really have much of a view on pastoral distance, did he? Yeah. He just was with, let the little children come to me. It was none of that aggrandizement, no self-aggrandizement at all. Yeah. And some of that gets lost in the church, I think. And I was looking at it the other day, and I was thinking, well, we've got whole sectors of the church where their emphasis is very much on, look, it's not about me, it's about Christ in me. And then we've got another sector of the church where it's all about who I am in Christ. And we could do with a bit of each from each other, really. We all need to know who we are in Christ, but we also need to recognize that it's Christ in us that makes the difference. Yeah. So, I suppose a bit more humility in the church, or perhaps even quite a lot more in humility in the church, could go a long way.
No, I think we, all that is well recognized, because, as you know, and there's a lot of leadership structures, there's a lot of, ways to kind of get through to people. And, I agree, which is, Jesus is someone that said, look, come to me, and there's no distance with Jesus, right? And
aren't you glad? I am. Otherwise, I'd never have got in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's so good, Hugh. And obviously, I want to just talk about now, which was sort of moving away from your early career and sort of church planting. What was life like after, which is from the calling from going from church planting to kind of then that next season of your life?
Yeah, that was a bit tough. I reached a point where I'd got a network of churches. I'd got a lot of chaplaincy that I was overseeing, and people were saying to me, we could do with more of your time. And so I thought, oh, well, that's easy. I'll just appoint a resident pastor and give more of my time. And a couple of things I hadn't realized. One was that I don't think the church was really looking for a substitute. They were looking for more of someone who genuinely could lead and give them the time. And that was quite tough. It meant that I actually had to hand things over. And that was quite an experience, really, letting go of what you built over a long number of years. But yeah, I said, biggest strength, biggest weakness is giving things away. So there you go. Yeah. So,
and how many churches were there?
The network of churches I continued to work with. The local church that I'd planted was what I basically gave away. I did carry on wanting to do things, but yeah, there is a sense in which you have to release. I think sometimes when people talk about sending, we want to be a sending church. They don't want to be a releasing church. We want to hang on to everyone. But sometimes you have to learn how to release. So that was quite tricky. And the other thing that was quite odd was that I'd actually set up the network of churches and chaplaincies and everything else that we've got to be a mutual accountability thing. I didn't want to set it up like an apostolic network where, I was like the hub and all the spokes had to relate to me. I thought, no, that's not. And I've seen a few of those where the hub broke and all the spokes didn't know where to go. So I thought, no, this needs to be much more like a net. I mean, Jesus chose people who knew how to mend nets.
Wow.
Which is, build relationships with other people. So I wanted to build a network that was really about relationships between people, not about me. I look back to when I was church planting and realized that, I'd been encouraged to relate to my peers, not just to look up to some great man. And so that's what I thought. Let's get people relating to their peers. And then I found myself moving on from leading the church. And I thought, oh, great, I'll lead the network, So I said to them, how do you feel about me working full-time for churches and communities? And they said, well, you've got us all to join this by bringing in our ministries, our churches, our chaplaincies. So what are you going to bring in? And I thought, oh, well, I was going to sit on top of the pile. And they said, no, you join the same way as everyone else. So that's when I set up Charis Communications, which for a long time acted like a consultancy, so that I was there for people that had got big plans and wanted to know how to implement them, and I could bring out a bit of experience. Had 3 goals, really: increasing biblical literacy, raising up effective leaders, and enhancing kingdom initiatives, which was the sort of consultancy side. So it was an interesting transition. But I had some people who traveled with me on that journey, so I wasn't exactly doing it on my own. And my wife was really supportive, even though obviously we'd moved from a situation where we had a salary to one where we didn't know what was going to happen. But hey, we'd done that before, so did it again.
Wow. Walk by faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Walk by sight.
Yeah, although when you walk by faith, you do need to remember that you're also walking by everyone else's love. Because if they're not generous, you're stuck.
Yeah. So now, obviously, with Charis Communications, look, I know that you're doing some phenomenal work in the kingdom. And can we talk about The Chosen?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that's very interesting. I had a quite a young team in the office, and they got really, really enthusiastic about The Chosen. And then one of the people who I took on staff had an acting career, and the Lord spoke to him and said, look, I want you from in front of the camera to behind it. And this was a big moment for him. So I was quite happy to sort of, just be there for him as a friend, really. And he came on the team, worked with me. We traveled a lot together. And then he said, look, I'd like to start making some films. So he set up his own film company, which is separate from anything that I do, except we share the same building now. But and he started doing these parables retold. So like doing the parables in a modern setting. And then lockdown came. And we went for quite a lot of long walks together, and he really inspired me to start writing again, which was something I hadn't done for years. But all the time he was thinking about writing a film script and bringing these parables retold into a feature film. And that was great. I mean, he managed to get a grant, and I managed to raise some money from some churches, and we made this feature film. was a bit chaotic in my office because we had everything there. It was like the base for everything that was going on. But he took that feature film out to a film festival in the States.
Wow.
And Angel Studios, who did The Chosen, saw what he'd done and said, if you can do what we've seen on a budget as small as you had, we want to see what you can do on a bigger budget. So the idea was that he'd do the Book of Acts and do it in an alternate modern day setting. So I was really blessed because by this point he was still working with me a little bit, enough to actually give me the scripts as they were coming out and to get me to read the scripts, which was great. And so I was able to watch all of this come together. And Raw Light has been amazing. They've put this together. They've just released season 1 of Testament, which is basically covering Acts 1 to 8, and just reaching the point where the team are starting to look at writing season 2. And the privilege for me was that, I was the theological advisor, but they actually allowed me to be a theological advisor on the set.
Wow.
So I was, for the first time, actually experiencing chaplaincy from a hands-on point of view. I'd had all of these people that were part of churches and communities that were military chaplains, hospital chaplains, sports chaplains, prison, so many chaplains, more chaplains than churches really. And for the first time, I was actually experiencing what it's like to be involved in something where you're not part of the main action. I wasn't acting, I wasn't directing, I wasn't doing anything. I was just there to be there for the cast and crew. In some ways to help them understand, because when you're filming a TV series, you don't film it as you're going to show it. You film it in bits and pieces everywhere. And so most of the cast were saying, how on earth does this fit in? And, so it was fascinating, but it's been a really interesting journey. And it's one of the privileges at the moment that I've got, that not only do I have folk from the network of churches that I work closely with, but I also have the people that are involved in Raw Light and the film. Yeah, that's very inspirational.
Do you see yourself acting in one of those?
I did at school. Yeah, I did a lot of acting at school. Yeah. They used to give me the big parts because in those days I could remember everything. These days, I really get stuck. Even doing this, it's okay ad-libbing it. But if you'd ask me to do it off a script, I'd be like, I can't remember any of that. But when I was at school, I could do it, So they made me play Macbeth in Macbeth and to play Brutus in Julius Caesar. So all the long parts they'd give me because I could remember it. Yeah. These days, I really can't. You have to feed it to me line by line to actually get it out of me. But I did manage to get I think it was my right leg got in one shot, and my arm got in another shot. So my arm and my leg have been in there. But the main thing was I had some great conversations with cast and crew.
That's great. Do you think a lot of all the media stuff, like, TV series like Chosen, and we've seen House of David come out as well. And, do you think we can see a lot more of that coming out?
Yeah, we will see a lot more of that because there's a lot of young people around that are very, very much into media. And, when I go into churches, it's almost impossible to go into a church without finding a group of people that have either done media studies or interested in media. Yeah. The frustration they feel very often is they don't know where to go next with it. And a lot of people are spending all their time thinking about how can I get promoted? How can I get Angel Studios to take me on? Whereas that's not how it started. One of the things that really impressed me with Paul was in those early days, it wasn't all about how am I going to get big. It was how can we make the most of what we've got. Yeah. And one of the challenges in the UK is that there is an appetite for Christian film and Christian media stuff, but it's not at a church level. It's at a church membership level. And even with The Chosen, to be honest, I can't think of churches that have really maximized the opportunity of using The Chosen. And I've been trying really hard to get churches to maximize the opportunity of using Testament. But it actually gets in amongst the individuals and it spreads by word of mouth and people say, hey, have you seen this? And And that's really good. And the difference between The Chosen and Testament was, I think, without being unkind, The Chosen is something which my generation will watch and persuade their grandchildren to watch. What we did with Testament was to let's produce something that the grandchildren will watch and persuade their grandparents to watch.
Right.
It's the other way around. We're aiming a different generation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we've also seen animation as well come into cinema with all that gone on in that scene. So it's really a unique time we're living in. We're seeing evangelism in all these different ways that we've not really exploited them in the past, but now we are.
And not just in the UK setting, but in some of the most difficult places in the world to get the gospel out, media is making a difference. Yeah. And in some places, what is really effective now is taking people from those nations that have got a relationship with Jesus and encouraging them to produce materials so that it is actually in their own culture, and then that communicates. So there's a lot going on at the moment, and I'm really committed to charities that do that kind of work.
Awesome. Hugh, I want to ask you as a final before we're going to go into what I call 7 quickfire rapid questions.
Oh, those. I dread those.
What's your mandate?
What's my mandate?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think it has changed, really. My mandate has always, I was looking back at this, and I can almost remember a time when this became my great thing to actually help other people fulfill their God-given agendas. That probably has been the biggest thing in my life, whether it was helping set up God TV or Revelation TV or any of these things we've been involved in the past. It was helping people fulfill their God-given agendas, and that with young aspirational church leaders as well. Yeah. So that's been big. These days, it's still that, but I'm beginning to sense that I do want to do more in this whole area of just encouraging people to realize they can take a lead. They don't have to be a sort of just passive follower, but can be motivated to be a leader. So it links in with that, of getting people to fulfill their God-given agenda, but it probably relates a little bit more to making people realize that they have got a God-given agenda too.
Yeah. And look, I just want to echo that, because as much as you're saying that to me, I know you off this, and you do that for me, and you've been so helpful to me and sort of all I'm doing. So you're a man of not just saying it, but you do it, and you sort of want to practice what you preach.
Well, I sort of do it, but I encourage people like you to do it. that's why it works.
Yeah, but just overall, which is, I echo that, and I know that that is certainly where you are really helpful for this generation and my generation as well, that we're coming into. And we look up to you as inspiration, mentorship, and really helping us, guide us, and take the lessons and learnings from from the past, but also applying that for the present. Because we want to see an awakened generation. We want to see things shift and take lead from people like yourself. So I really thank you for that. For all that you do for me. On that note,
well, that's good. But while you're looking up to me, I'm looking up to you as well. So.
Thanks, Hugh. Look, I really want to get into 7 quickfire rapid questions. 7 is literally, as we call completion, the number. And
but you're not necessarily going to get perfect answers, I can tell you now. Here we go.
So when you're ready, let me know, and I will just go through it.
Oh, well, I'm not ready, and I never will be, but let's go.
Pizza or pasta?
Pasta.
Coffee or tea?
Neither.
Morning or night owl?
Morning.
If you could have dinner with any of the Bible characters, who would it be?
That's a tough one. Oh my goodness. I've no idea. I'll have to pass.
One thing nobody knows about you.
Well, I'm not going to tell that, otherwise everyone would know.
There must be something.
What should I say?
A hobby. Anything.
Oh, I still relax by playing the piano. Then most people don't know that, so I keep quiet about that.
One career moment highlight.
It has to be related to people seeing their dream come true. And yeah, that could be a number of things, but I've certainly been really excited at how Paul has seen Testament come true. That's a recent highlight for me.
And finally, one leadership book or one leader that you've really looked up to or been inspired by?
Oh, it'd have to be Billy Graham, really.
Yeah, it's got to be Billy.
It has to be Billy, Mr. Integrity.
Yeah. And on that note with Billy, I just want to ask, from my perspective, as much as all the work he did, I was talking to a pastor, and the secret, he said, to Billy Graham was the fact that he stayed in his calling and he never deviated. He literally was evangelizing. He focused on evangelism and he never deviated from that, which he told me that was, why he was so successful. When God calls you and you focus on what he's called you to do, and because you can get sidetracked, it's a secret.
I think it is. The other thing about him was he was incredibly humble. In fact, when I was working, his team said to me, he's going to ask you questions about everything. And you could end up thinking he's insecure, but actually he just really wants to know how to be relevant in the circumstances in which he places himself.
If Billy Graham was here today, what do you think would be on his mind?
I think he's happier where he is, actually. Yeah, it would probably be that. I mean, he did have a real anticipation of wanting to be in the presence of the Lord. Yeah. And I think that would be on his mind.
Brilliant. Well, Hugh, I just want to say again, thank you so much just for your time. I know how busy you are, but just having this opportunity to talk to you, bring you into our audience, and really talking about faith off the record, and you're a man who's done tremendous work, but also not just that, a great human being, someone who I genuinely look up to and really appreciative of all your support, all your help, and really blessing us with your wisdom and learnings that we would really capitalize on. So again, thank you for your time, for being on the show, and really helping us and this generation really excel in what we're trying to do, which is promote the gospel and be better Christians and be better leaders in that respect. So my love and always support to you as well.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you, Hugh.